He had already picked out the ring. He had already memorized her laugh. The way she tilted her head when she thought something was funny. The exact way she said his name when she was surprised by something. He had already rehearsed, quietly, in the bathroom mirror of his Atlanta apartment. The words he was going to say when they were finally standing face to face at the altar. Marcus Webb had done everything right. He had waited long enough after his divorce, built himself back up, learned from his mistakes, become the kind of man he was proud of. And then he met Claire. And for the first time in 11 years, he allowed himself to believe that the life he had put back together was finally complete. 2 nights before their wedding, at 2:17 in the morning, Marcus got up from bed to get a glass of water. He was not trying to listen. He was not looking for anything. He was just thirsty in his own apartment, doing the most ordinary thing a person can do at 2 a.m. But as he passed the half-closed door of the living room on his way back to bed, he heard Claire's voice. Low, urgent, speaking to someone on the phone in a tone he had never heard her use before. Not the tone she used at work. Not the tone she used with him. Something else entirely. Something that made him stop walking. Something that made him stand in the hallway for 3 full minutes without moving, listening to the woman he was about to marry say words that changed everything. This is the story of what Marcus Webb heard that night. It is the story of what it cost him to find out whether what he heard was the truth. And it is the story of what happens to a man who has spent his entire adult life being careful, being deliberate, being the kind of person who thinks before he acts, when he is finally confronted with a question that thinking cannot answer. Stay with us, because by the time this story is over, you are going to ask yourself what you would have done, and you may not like your answer. Before we get into everything that followed, the phone call, the sleepless hours, the conversations Marcus was not supposed to have, and the conversation he absolutely had to, let us set the stage properly. Marcus Webb is 47 years old. He is a civil engineer, a senior project manager at a mid-sized infrastructure firm in Atlanta, Georgia. He is the kind of man who calculates load-bearing capacity for a living, who understands that the integrity of a structure depends entirely on what is happening underneath the surface. He has 2 adult children from his first marriage. He is close with his older brother Derek and deeply devoted to his mother, Judith, who has been quietly worried about this wedding for reasons she has never said out loud. Claire Dawson is 44. She is a marketing director at a hospitality brand headquartered in Midtown Atlanta. She is charming in the specific way that professionally fluent people are charming. She knows what people want to hear. She is genuinely warm, and she moves through a room like someone who has never once doubted that she belongs in it. She and Marcus met 3 years ago at a professional event that neither of them expected to be interesting. They talked for 40 minutes and then kept talking. They dated seriously. They built something real. And then, 9 months before the date of this story, Marcus proposed. Claire said yes without hesitating. The wedding was scheduled. The venue was booked. The dress was chosen. Everything was in place. Until it wasn't. Here are the 3 questions that this story is going to answer for you. The first, what exactly did Marcus hear Claire say that night? The second, who was she saying it to and why? And the third, the one underneath everything else, is this. Was the woman Marcus Webb was about to marry the woman he thought she was? We are going to answer all 3. But to understand what he heard, you have to understand what he had. And to understand what he had, you have to go back to the beginning. Marcus grew up in Southwest Atlanta, the second of 2 sons born to Harold and Judith Webb. Harold was a corrections officer who worked double shifts for 15 years so that his boys would not have to. Judith was an elementary school administrator who ran her house like a classroom, with structure, warmth, and a zero-tolerance policy for excuses. Marcus was not the loudest kid in any room he was ever in. He was the one paying attention while the other kids were talking. He was the one who figured out how things worked, and then kept that information to himself until it was useful. His teachers recognized something in him early. Not brilliance, exactly, though he was sharp, but steadiness. An unusual capacity to sit with a problem without panicking, to look at something broken and start methodically identifying why. He went to Georgia Tech on an academic scholarship, graduated with a civil engineering degree in 2000, and went straight into the workforce. He married Denise Harrington in 2004. Denise was a good person and Marcus was a good person. And for 6 years, they were two good people who were not quite right for each other, trying harder and harder to be. There was no dramatic collapse, no infidelity, no explosion, just the slow, honest recognition that they had grown into adults who wanted different things from their lives, and that neither of them was willing to hold the other back from those things. They divorced in 2010. They share custody of their son, Brandon, who is now 22, and their daughter, Keisha, who is 19. Both of Marcus's children have told him, at different points in the past 3 years, that they have never seen their father happier. That mattered to Marcus more than he let on. The years between the divorce and Claire were not empty, but they were careful. Marcus stated he was not a man who was going to sit alone in an apartment and let his life calcify, but he also was not going to rush. He had learned, through the experience of a marriage that ended quietly and sorrowfully, that love alone is not sufficient structural support. You have to know the person. You have to understand how they work when things go wrong, not just when things go right. He spent 11 years becoming someone he respected, and by the time he met Claire Dawson at that professional mixer on a Thursday evening in the spring of 2021, he was finally ready to let someone in again. The event was a civic leadership forum hosted by a downtown Atlanta business coalition, the kind of networking event that generates a lot of business cards and very few genuine conversations. Marcus was there representing his firm, which had submitted a proposal for a major highway infrastructure project. He was not in the mood to be charming. He had driven directly from a site visit and was still thinking about a drainage problem that had been bothering him all week. He found a quiet corner near the back of the room with a glass of water and a clear line of sight to the exit. And then Claire Dawson walked over and asked him, without introduction, what he thought about the city's approach to storm water management in the downtown corridor, not as a pickup line, because she genuinely wanted to know. Her hospitality company had a hotel near a flood-prone zone, and it was costing them money. They talked for 40 minutes about infrastructure. Then they talked for another hour about everything else. They went to a bar neither of them had planned to go to and stayed until it closed. Marcus drove home thinking about her in the specific way that means you are already in trouble, not the frantic, electric way of early infatuation, but the settled, warm way of recognizing someone, like finding a book you didn't know you were looking for. He called his brother Derek the next morning and said, I met someone. Derek asked what she was like. Marcus thought about it for a second and said, she asked me a real question. Derek, who has been married for 24 years and understands Marcus as well as anyone alive, said, then you better not mess it up. He did not mess it up. They dated for a year before Marcus met her parents. They dated for another year before she met his kids. Everything moved at the pace that two careful adults who have both been burned by carelessness set for themselves. And it worked. Keisha told Marcus after her first dinner with Claire, Dad, she actually listens when you talk, like she's actually paying attention. That, for Marcus, was the highest possible endorsement. He proposed on a Saturday morning in their kitchen, no restaurant, no audience, no performance. Just the two of them, and a ring he had been carrying in his coat pocket for 3 weeks waiting for a moment. That felt honest enough. Claire cried. Then she laughed. Then she said yes. But there were things. There are always things. And the ones that matter are almost never the ones that look alarming. They are the small, quiet, easily explained moments that a person with Marcus's inclination towards systematic thinking catalogs and files under reasonable. Renee Castle was the first of those things. Renee was Claire's best friend from college, a 46-year-old woman, sharp and funny and fiercely loyal to Claire in a way that Marcus genuinely respected. But Renee had never fully warmed to Marcus. Not openly hostile, never rude, just slightly withheld, in the way that someone is withheld when they are measuring you against a standard they have not told you about and are not yet sure you meet. Marcus had noticed it from the beginning. He had explained it to himself as personality. Some people take longer. Some people protect their friends more vigilantly than others. He left room for it. Then there were the weekends. Claire had a close friend group, 6 women who had known each other for 15 or more years, and they took occasional trips together, a tradition that had started long before Marcus was in the picture. He respected this. He had no interest in being the kind of man who surveilled his partner's social life. But he had noticed over the course of 3 years. That certain of these trips generated a particular kind of privacy around them. Claire was not secretive about going. She told him when she was leaving, when she would be back. But she was consistently vague about details in a way that was not dramatic enough to flag, but that Marcus had, in fact, noticed. He had filed it. He had told himself it was nothing. He was a man who trusted logic. And the logical explanation was that people are allowed to have friendships that do not require full disclosure to their partner. The third thing was subtler still. Occasionally, not often, but occasionally, when Marcus raised certain topics about their future, particularly financial ones, Claire's answers had a quality of slight lag to them. Not evasiveness, exactly. More like translation. Like she was taking what she actually wanted to say and running it through a filter before she spoke. Marcus had noticed this. He had attributed it to the fact that money is a complicated subject for most people, and that Claire had some complicated history with it that she had alluded to without detailing. He had not pushed. He was a man who believed in giving people room to tell him things in their own time. 2 nights before their wedding, standing in his own hallway at 2:17 in the morning, he would discover that the time for waiting had expired. The night of the phone call was supposed to be an ordinary night. They had just come back from a family dinner at Claire's parents' house in Buckhead, a formal, careful evening with both sets of family. That had gone better than either of them had expected. Claire's mother, Patricia, had been warmer than usual. Marcus's mother, Judith, had been gracious and measured in the way. She is always gracious and measured when she is also privately worried about something. On the drive back to their shared apartment in Midtown, Claire had been affectionate and relieved, squeezing Marcus's hand across the center console, talking about the ceremony, laughing about something her cousin had said. They had gone to sleep without incident. Marcus was out within minutes. He was not an anxious man. He did not lie awake catastrophizing. He worked hard, and he slept well. Until 2:17 a.m., when he woke up for no reason he could identify, in the way that sometimes happens, and found that he was thirsty. He got his water. He was walking back down the hall when he heard it. The living room door was pulled most of the way closed, but not latched. Through the gap, he could hear Claire's voice, not loud, not raised, but carrying the specific compression of someone who is speaking urgently in a space where they do not want to be heard. He stopped. He told himself later that he stopped because the tone was wrong, because something in the register of her voice was different from any register he had heard in 3 years, because whatever instinct lives underneath systematic thinking fired before the systematic thinking could override it. He stood. He listened. He heard enough. Claire was speaking to Renee. That much was clear from context. She was talking about the wedding, about Marcus, and about something she referred to more than once as the plan. Something that had to happen before the wedding. Something that, in her words, Marcus could not know about until after. The exact words Marcus would later replay in his head, in order, as precisely as he could reconstruct them. Renee, it is done. I told you it was going to be done before Saturday, and it is done. Then, after a pause, he cannot know about this. Not yet. Not until we are on the other side of it. Then, I know how it sounds. But this is not something he is going to understand right now. He will understand it later. He just can't understand it right now. And then, after another pause that Marcus could not hear the other side of, it doesn't change anything between us. It just has to happen this way. Marcus stood in the hallway. He did not go in. He did not speak. He turned and went back to the bedroom and lay down next to Claire's empty side of the bed and stared at the ceiling with the particular stillness of a man who has just felt the ground shift beneath something he had built very carefully. He did not sleep again that night. He lay there and did what he always does when he encounters a problem he cannot immediately solve. He organized the information. He ran through what he had heard. He separated what he knew from what he was inferring. He identified the possible interpretations. There were, as he cataloged them, 3 distinct categories of what the phone call could mean. The first was innocent, something benign that Claire was handling without him for reasons that would make sense when explained. The second was ambiguous, something that was not benign but was not catastrophic, something in the territory of a secret that was not necessarily a betrayal. And the third was the one he was not ready to name yet, the one he kept sliding away from every time his mind approached it. By 5 a.m., he had not moved. By 6 a.m., He could hear Claire stirring in the bathroom. By 6:15, he heard the coffee maker. He waited exactly 4 minutes, and then got up and went out and had breakfast with the woman he was going to marry in 48 hours, as if nothing in the world had changed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Claire at breakfast was warm and unhurried. She made eggs. She talked about the timeline for the rehearsal that afternoon. She asked Marcus if he had remembered to confirm with Derek about the groomsmen's arrival time. She was entirely herself, relaxed, cheerful, moving around the kitchen with the ease of someone who had gone to bed satisfied and slept well. Marcus watched her from his seat at the table and said the right things at the right times and felt, for the first time in 3 years, like he was performing the role of a man having breakfast with his fiancée rather than simply being one. He noted this. He filed it. He drank his coffee, and when Claire kissed him on the cheek and went to get ready, he sat for a moment in the quiet of their kitchen and made a decision. He was not going to go to Claire directly. Not yet. He did not have enough information. He was an engineer. You do not go to the structural problem before you understand what is causing it. He called Derek from the parking lot of their apartment building while Claire finished getting ready upstairs. Derek answered on the second ring, which is what Derek does when he sees Marcus's name, because Derek knows his younger brother and knows that a call before 8 a.m. is not casual. Marcus told him everything. He told it in order, the way he always tells things, what he knew, what he heard, what he could not determine from what he heard. Derek listened without interrupting. This was unusual. Derek is not a man who listens without interrupting. When Marcus finished, there was a silence that lasted long enough to be meaningful. And then Derek said, "Marcus, what exactly is she planning with those people?" It was not a question that offered comfort. It was the question that Marcus had been trying not to ask himself since 2:17 a.m. And hearing someone else say it out loud made it heavier in a way that sitting alone with it had not. They agreed on a plan. Marcus would get through the rehearsal that afternoon without tipping anything. He would keep watching, keep listening, keep gathering information. Derek would be at the rehearsal dinner and would pay attention to the dynamics between Claire and Renee. Neither of them said what they were watching for. They both knew what Marcus was watching for was anything that would resolve the uncertainty in the direction of innocence. He needed it to be innocent. He was 47 years old. He had waited 11 years to feel this way about someone again. He had done everything right. And so he got back in the elevator and went upstairs and smiled at Claire when she came out of the bedroom in the dress she had picked for the rehearsal dinner. And he thought she looked beautiful, which she did, and he told her so. And she hugged him, and he held on a little longer than usual. And she didn't seem to notice why. The rehearsal was held at a mid-century chapel in Decatur that Marcus and Claire had fallen in love with for its light, the way the afternoon sun came through the south-facing windows and long, horizontal beams that made everything inside it look gilded. Marcus had stood in that chapel 6 weeks earlier with the wedding coordinator and thought, this is the right place. He stood in it now, in the early afternoon, watching it fill with family and the wedding party, and he observed everything. He was not clumsy about it. He had spent 25 years in rooms where reading the environment was a professional requirement. He knew how to look at something without appearing to look. He watched Renee. He watched Claire. He watched the specific quality of their interactions when they were in proximity to each other and when they thought no one was watching. What he noticed, they were careful, not in the way people are. Careful when they are hiding something. Catastrophic, frantic, overcorrecting, unable to sustain eye contact. But careful in the way that people are careful when they have agreed on something and are both working to hold the agreement steady. There was a moment during the rehearsal run-through when the wedding coordinator asked Claire a question about the processional order, and Claire glanced at Renee before she answered. It was a half-second, a flicker, the kind of thing that is nothing if you are not already paying attention and is something very specific if you are. Marcus cataloged it. He said nothing. He went through the rehearsal and said the right things in the right places and shook hands with Claire's father, Gerald, and hugged her mother, Patricia, and stood next to Derek and accepted a clap on the shoulder and heard Derek say quietly, near his ear, "They're talking with their eyes." Marcus said nothing. He knew. Later at the rehearsal dinner, a private room at a restaurant in Buckhead that Claire's parents had booked for 40 people, Marcus managed to be near enough to catch a partial exchange between Claire and Renee while the room was loud with toasts and laughter. He caught the tail end of it. Renee said something he couldn't fully hear. Claire responded with, "It's handled. I promise. It's handled." And then they both looked up and the moment ended. Marcus turned back to his conversation with Claire's uncle as if he had not heard anything at all. He ate his food. He made a speech. He thanked the families. He was good at this, at the performance of normalcy under pressure. But by the time he and Claire were in the car on the way home, he had made another decision. He was not going to get through this on observation alone. He needed to know what he was actually dealing with. And that meant he was going to have to find a way into it that didn't go directly through Claire. Not yet. Derek called him at 10 p.m. after Claire had gone to bed. Marcus took the call in the kitchen with the door to the bedroom closed. Derek's theory was the one Marcus had already considered and then set aside because he hadn't been ready to carry it further. The financial angle. Claire was a marketing director at a successful company. She was not struggling. But Derek knew something that Marcus had not focused on. Claire had a younger brother named Owen, 28 years old, who had been a source of quiet tension in the Dawson family for the better part of 3 years. Derek had picked up on this at family events, the way Claire's parents went slightly stiff when Owen's name came up, the way Owen himself had been absent from 2 or 3 gatherings where his presence would have been expected. Derek's theory was simple and logical. Whatever Claire was handling, it involved Owen. And whatever it involved Owen had something to do with money. And whatever it had to do with money was something she did not want Marcus involved in before they were legally married. Marcus sat with this theory at the kitchen table for a long time. He ran the math, as he does. Claire's finances were not a mystery to him. They had been transparent with each other about money in the way that two adults in their 40s who are preparing to merge their lives are generally required to be. She had savings. She had a retirement account. She had no significant debt. She was not a woman in financial crisis herself. But she could have resources that she had been redirecting. She could have been paying something off. Something belonging to someone else. Something she did not want to bring into the beginning of a marriage. As an unsolved problem, this theory was plausible. It was consistent with what he had heard, the emphasis on it being done, the emphasis on Marcus not knowing yet, the assurance that it wouldn't change anything between them. It fit. Almost. The thing Marcus kept returning to was the tone. He had listened to Claire on that phone call. He had heard the specific compression of her voice, the particular weight of what she was carrying. If she was simply handling a family financial problem, something transactional, something logistical, something done out of loyalty and love, the voice would have been different. Tired, maybe. Relieved it was over. But what Marcus had heard carried something else beneath the relief. Something that sounded in the specific emotional vocabulary that 11 years of adulthood and one marriage had given him. Like the voice of someone who was keeping a decision they had made entirely alone inside a relationship. That was supposed to be a partnership. That was the thing that bothered him. Not necessarily what it was, but that it existed inside a silence that was also, somehow, a choice about him. By 1 a.m., in the hotel room he had retreated to for the night before the wedding, a decision Claire had agreed to with a smile and a kiss, laughing at his insistence on the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. Marcus's mind had found a third angle. He was doing something he recognized was not entirely healthy and also could not stop himself from doing. Going back through Claire's history for gaps. He was not looking for something specific. He was looking for the shape of what the specific thing might be. And he found it in March, a weekend in mid-March of the previous year when Claire had gone to Savannah with Renee. A weekend Marcus had not thought twice about at the time. A weekend he had not verified because there was no reason to verify it. He thought about it now. He thought about whether he had actually confirmed, at the time or at any point since, that Renee had in fact been there. He thought about Owen again. Owen, who was 28 and had been quietly absent from family events. Owen, who had caused some unspoken tension in the Dawson household for reasons Marcus had never been told. Owen, who existed in the negative space of a story Claire had given him the outline of without the details. The March weekend and Owen were not necessarily connected, but Marcus's mind, running on no sleep and a lot of adrenaline, was not making clean distinctions between what was connected and what was not. He was doing the thing that a man does at 1 a.m. the night before his wedding when he has heard something he cannot unhear. He was building a structure out of incomplete materials and then standing back and looking at it and being afraid of what it was starting to look like. He made himself stop. He set the phone down. He went to the window and looked at the Atlanta skyline and did the thing he knows how to do. He made a list of what he actually knew versus what he was inferring. What he knew was 1 phone call, 6 sentences, and 2 days of careful observation. What he was inferring was everything else. He was an engineer. He built things that had to hold weight in the real world. He was not going to walk away from a 3-year relationship on an inference at 1 a.m. He picked up his phone and called Renee's husband, Kevin, a casual, controlled call, 9 minutes. Wedding logistics as the stated reason. Near the end of the call, in a pause that was not constructed to seem like anything, he asked if Kevin had enjoyed Savannah in March. Kevin said yes. It had been a good weekend. He and Renee had both been tired when they got back, but Claire had organized a great trip. Marcus said that was great and wrapped up the call and sat in the dark for a long time with the phone in his hands and thought about what it meant that the March weekend was exactly what Claire had told him it was. He went to see his mother the morning of the wedding. Not to talk about the phone call, not directly. His mother is a woman who has always been able to locate the truth of a situation slightly faster than Marcus is comfortable with, and he was not ready to hand her the full picture. But he needed to be in her presence. He needed to sit in the living room of the house he grew up in and drink coffee and hear the voice. That has been the steadiest thing in his life since before he can remember. Judith was up and dressed when he arrived, which is how she always is, regardless of the hour. She made coffee and set out the good cups and sat across from him at the kitchen table and waited. She is a woman who has spent 40 years listening to people who needed someone to listen, and she knows the difference between a son who wants to talk and a son who wants to be in a room with someone before he can figure out how to talk. He told her, eventually, in the oblique way that people talk to their parents about things they are not quite ready to say plainly. He said he was thinking about what it means to really know someone. He said he was thinking about whether 3 years was enough time. He said he was thinking about what a person owes their partner in terms of transparency before they commit to each other permanently. Judith listened to all of this with the expression of a woman who is hearing more than is being said. She answered the questions he was not asking. She talked about his father, Harold, and the years early in their marriage when they were each, in different ways, still becoming themselves, and how trust was not a thing you started with in full. It was a thing you built, deliberately, out of the choices you made to be honest, even when honesty was inconvenient. She talked about what it means to give someone room to tell you something in their own time, versus what it means to wait so long for the room that the moment passes and the thing goes unsaid. And then, without Marcus having said a word about Claire directly, Judith said the thing she had clearly come to say. She looked at her son across her kitchen table, the son she has known every version of since the day he was born, and she said, "Marcus, there is nothing wrong with asking someone directly what they mean. There is only something wrong with being afraid of the answer." Marcus did not respond immediately. He sat with it. He finished his coffee. He hugged his mother for a long time in the doorway, and then he drove back toward the wedding venue. And somewhere on the highway, with 4 hours left before the ceremony, he made his decision. His phone rang before he arrived. The caller ID said Renee. He answered. Renee said, "I need to talk to you before tonight." Alone, they met in the lobby bar of the hotel where Marcus had spent the night. A neutral space, public enough to be controlled, quiet enough at midday to allow for the kind of conversation that was about to happen. Renee was already there when Marcus arrived. She was not the version of herself he had observed across 3 years of guarded warmth and measured approval. She was different, not soft. Exactly. Renee Castle is not a soft person, but braced in the way that someone is braced when they have decided to say something difficult and have committed to saying it cleanly, without evasion. She did not make small talk. She folded her hands on the table and said, "I know you heard her." Not a question, a statement. Marcus confirmed it. Renee nodded, and then she told him. Claire's younger brother Owen had a gambling problem. It had started, as these things often do, quietly, sports betting, a few $100s at a time. The kind of behavior that is easy to dismiss as a harmless habit until it is not harmless. And it is not a habit, but a disorder that has compounded itself across 18 months into something that threatened to take the Dawson family's home. Gerald and Patricia owned their house outright and had borrowed against it in retirement, and Owen, without fully understanding or caring what he was doing, had used their trust and his access to certain accounts to turn a home equity line of credit into a gambling fund that had eaten through most of what his parents had spent 40 years building. By the time Claire found out, 9 months ago, the same week Marcus proposed, the debt was real, the house was in genuine jeopardy, and her parents were too ashamed to ask anyone for help. Claire had made a decision. She would handle it. She had savings, and she had a plan, and she had Renee to help her execute it. And she was going to walk into her wedding with the problem already solved so that she and Marcus could begin their marriage without a crisis hanging over it that was not of either of their making. The reason she had not told Marcus was not because she didn't trust him. It was because she knew him. She knew that if she told Marcus Webb about a structural problem, he would immediately begin designing a solution. He would involve himself. He would take it over, not out of control, but out of competence. He would make it into a joint project. And she did not want to begin an engagement, negotiating a financial rescue operation for her brother. She wanted to fix it herself and then tell Marcus when they were on the other side of it. In the honest way, with nothing left to solve. The phrase he had heard on the phone, "It is done," was literal. She had made the final transfer 3 days before the wedding. It was over. Owen had been confronted, the debt was cleared, and her parents' house was safe. Renee let this land. She gave Marcus the time he needed. And then she said the thing she had clearly come to say that was separate from the explanation. She handles things alone because she has always had to. That is not something she does to you. But you are going to have to decide if you can live with being on the outside of something while she figures out whether she can let you in. Marcus sat across the table from the woman who had been measuring him for 3 years and realized, in that moment, that this was actually the moment of the measurement. Not whether he could forgive Claire for what she had kept from him, but whether he understood it, whether he was capable of seeing the difference between a secret kept out of fear and a secret kept out of love, and whether he was big enough to hold both things at once. He sat in that lobby bar for a long time after Renee left. He sat with everything she had said and everything he had spent the past 48 hours carrying and let it settle into its actual shape. And when it settled, what he felt was not anger. What he felt, and this surprised him, which is unusual because Marcus Webb is not easily surprised by his own responses, was grief, not for what he had discovered, for what it meant about the distance that had still existed between them. After 3 years, after everything they had built, he found her in the bridal suite 90 minutes before the ceremony. They were not supposed to see each other. It was against every tradition they had agreed to, against the plan the coordinator had mapped out, against everything. Marcus did not care about any of that. He knocked on the door. Claire's cousin opened it and took one look at Marcus and stepped aside. Claire was standing at the window in the early stages of getting ready, her hair half done, her dress hanging on the back of the closet door. And she turned when he came in and took one look at his face and said, "You heard me." Marcus said, "Renee told me." Claire said, "I'm sorry. I should have told you." And then she said, in the specific way that people say things when they are done protecting themselves, "I know." What followed was not a fight. Marcus Webb is not a man who raises his voice when he is upset. And Claire Dawson is not a woman who dissolves when confronted with something difficult. What followed was a real conversation. The kind that happens when two people are completely out of time and therefore completely out of options for anything except the truth. Claire told him everything. She told him about Owen and the debt and her parents and the 9 months of quiet, private management that had run alongside their engagement. She told him why she hadn't told him. She was honest about the part she was less proud of, that it was not purely about protecting the engagement. It was also about her own stubbornness, her own refusal to need help, her own deep, early installed habit of being the person who solves things and presents them as solved rather than the person who lets someone else in while they are still in pieces. Marcus listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He is good at listening. It is one of the things Claire loves about him and one of the things that made it possible. at the end of her explanation, for her to sit in the silence that followed without filling it with apology. He let the silence be what it was. And then he asked the question he had not been able to stop, returning to since 2:17 a.m. He asked it quietly, the way he asks everything that matters. Do you trust me enough to stop protecting yourself from me? Claire looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes filled, not with guilt, or at least not only with guilt, with something that looked, to Marcus, like recognition, like the specific relief of being finally, truly seen by someone who is not going to use what they see against you. She said, I'm trying to. Marcus nodded. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, then let's go get married. The chapel in Decatur filled just after 4 o'clock with the particular light of a Georgia afternoon in late spring, long and golden and slightly forgiving of everything it touched. 83 people sat in those pews. Marcus's mother Judith was in the front left, her hands folded in her lap, watching the doors. Derek stood beside Marcus at the altar, which is the exact position Derek has occupied relative to his brother for Marcus's entire life. Brandon and Keisha were 3 rows back. Keisha already crying quietly, which is what she does, and Brandon watching his father, with the steady attention of a young man trying to understand what this moment is going to teach him about what comes next in his own life. And then the doors opened. Claire Dawson walked in on her father Gerald's arm, in a dress that was simple and exactly right for her. And she looked at Marcus the entire length of that aisle, not at the guests, not at the flowers, at Marcus. And Marcus looked back. He had been standing at that altar for 6 minutes, which is a long time to stand in front of 83 people, and think about what you are about to do. He had thought about the phone call. He had thought about the lobby bar and Renee's measured, careful honesty. He had thought about his mother's kitchen table and what his mother had said. He had thought about the version of Claire who had spent 9 months quietly solving a crisis alone because she did not yet trust herself to be anything other than already solved in front of the men she loved. He had thought about what it means to want that to change, and what it requires of both of them for it to change. They exchanged vows that they had written themselves, private, specific, full of the small references that only mean something to the 2 people inside the marriage. When Marcus finished his, Claire's cheeks were wet. When Claire finished hers, Marcus looked at her for a moment before he spoke and said, I meant all of that. The officiant pronounced them married. Judith Webb released a breath she had apparently been holding for some time. Derek grabbed Marcus's shoulder. Keisha made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. Brandon applauded. The room followed, and Marcus Webb kissed his wife in the long, golden light of a chapel in Decatur, Georgia, on a Saturday evening in late spring, and meant that too. 6 months after the wedding, Marcus Webb sits at his desk in his office at the infrastructure firm with a new set of blueprints spread across his drafting table and a framed photograph on the wall that was not there before. Him and Claire on the steps of the chapel, laughing at something just outside the frame. He looks settled, not in the way of a man who has decided that everything is fine, in the way of a man who has decided that he knows what he is doing and why he is doing it. That is a different kind of settled. It is harder to arrive at. It is also more durable. He and Claire are in couples therapy, not because the marriage is failing, not because the phone call broke something that cannot be repaired, because Marcus decided, in the weeks after the wedding, that if he was going to build this thing, he was going to build it correctly. And building it correctly meant not pretending that 2 people who had each, for their own reasons, learned to manage things alone were going to, suddenly and naturally, become partners without some external architecture to support the transition. Owen Dawson is in a gambling recovery program in Savannah. He has been sober from betting for 4 months. Marcus arranged the referral, not as a condition of anything, not as a power move, but because he is a man who, once he understands a problem, cannot stop himself from wanting to help solve it. Claire cried when he told her he had made the call. She said, You didn't have to do that. Marcus said, I know. There was a pause, and then Claire said, Thank you. Marcus said, He is your brother. That makes him mine too. Claire did not say anything else. She did not need to. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence from the one that had existed before. Not the silence of something being kept, but the silence of something being, for the first time, genuinely shared. Their couple's therapist, a woman named Dr. Patricia Hollis, who has been practicing in Atlanta for 22 years, asked Marcus in their third session what he had learned from everything that had happened. Marcus thought about it for a moment, which is what he always does, and said, I learned that the problem wasn't what she was hiding. The problem was that she had gotten good enough at hiding things to hide them from someone she loved without meaning to. And I had gotten good enough at noticing things to notice without saying anything. We were both very skilled at being alone inside the same relationship. Dr. Hollis wrote something in her notebook. Claire reached over and put her hand on Marcus's arm. He put his hand over hers. These are the small gestures that mean everything and nothing and everything again. Here is what this story is actually about. Not the phone call, not the wedding, not even Claire's brother or the debt or the 9 months of quiet management that ran alongside an engagement. This story is about the specific and very common habit that people who have been hurt before develop the habit of solving their own problems before they let anyone close enough to see that the problem exists. It is a survival mechanism. It is learned. It is not a character flaw. It is what happens when someone has spent enough of their life being the one who holds things together alone. Claire Dawson did not keep something from Marcus because she did not love him. She kept it from him because she had not yet fully learned how to be loved without simultaneously being in control of how she appeared to the person doing the loving. That is one of the most human things there is. And Marcus, steady, systematic, patient Marcus, had his own version of the same habit. He noticed things and filed them without saying what he had noticed. He gave people room out of respect and out of a kind of emotional reserve that was also, underneath, a protection. If he didn't say what he had observed, he couldn't be wrong about it. He couldn't be told that what he had seen was not what it was. For two people who are genuinely well-suited to each other, they had spent a remarkable amount of their relationship being careful in ways that were also, quietly, distances. The therapy is not fixing something broken. It is building a door in a wall that was already mostly good. Sometimes that is all it takes. There is something that the men watching this, particularly the men in this audience who are in the second half of their lives, who have already had one marriage or one long relationship that taught them the cost of getting it wrong, will recognize in Marcus's response to that phone call. He did not explode. He did not catastrophize. He did not go to Claire immediately and demand an explanation. He organized information. He consulted his brother. He visited his mother. He tried to understand what he was dealing with before he reacted to it. This is a very particular kind of masculine restraint, and it has real value. But it also has a cost. Because the restraint that protects you from reacting badly is the same restraint that can prevent you from reacting at all. Marcus had to learn to feel the thing before he finished analyzing it. That is harder than it sounds for a man who has built an entire professional life on the power of analysis. It is, perhaps, the most important thing he will continue to learn. We want to hear from you. Marcus Webb almost did not marry Claire Dawson, not because of what she was hiding, but because of what he was afraid the hiding meant about whether she truly trusted him. And here is the question we are leaving you with today. If you had been standing in that hallway at 2:17 in the morning and heard what Marcus heard, 6 sentences through a half-closed door, what would you have done? Would you have walked in and asked her directly? Would you have waited? Would you have gone back to bed and told yourself it was nothing? And when you found out the truth, the actual, complicated, neither simple nor catastrophic truth, would you have been able to separate what she did from why she did it? Those are not easy questions. We know they are not easy questions. That is exactly why we are asking them. Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. And here is the second question, the one underneath that first one. Do you know someone in your life, maybe yourself, who handles things alone the way Claire did? Who arrives at the hard conversations already holding a solved version of the problem? Who would rather present the answer than be seen struggling toward it? Because if you do, this story is not just about Marcus and Claire. It is about what it costs to love someone that way, and what it requires of the person being loved. These are the kinds of stories that sit with you. These are the kinds of questions that find you later, when you are driving somewhere or lying in the dark, and ask themselves again. That is what we come here to explore, the parts of human relationships that are not simple and do not resolve neatly and do not let you look away. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. If you stayed this far, You already know what kind of viewer you are. You are the kind who is not satisfied with a surface version of a story. You want to understand it. You want to know what it means and what it cost and what it changed. That is why we make these. And we have more. Next week, we are bringing you a story that is going to challenge you in a way that this one does not. A story not about a secret kept before a wedding, but about a truth that was told, clearly and directly, 11 years into a marriage, and how the man who heard it had to decide whether the truth was the same as the person he had married. We will see you then. Do not go anywhere.